Vexel Tarrant stood in the airlock of the transport shuttle, tapping his foot impatiently. The shuttle's display flickered between not ready and definitely not ready, a reminder of just how much the engineers loved their jobs on Selene 9. He muttered to himself, they've had decades to fix this crap, but nope, let's keep the suspense alive. The door finally creaked open, unleashing the stale, recycled air of Selene 9. Vexel stepped out, looking around with the enthusiasm of a man visiting his in-laws. The lunar colony sprawled before him, a mismatched collection of prefabricated buildings and slapdash patches to its aging infrastructure. It was more like a lunar junkyard than a thriving hub of human innovation. The perfect place for things to get grim, just the way he liked it. His comm unit buzzed with the cheerful voice of Jory, his mission handler back on Earth. "Vexel, you there?" "Nope, I evaporated. Just a ghost now," Vexel replied, rolling his eyes. "Great. Anyway, you're at Selene 9 to investigate those mysterious energy readings. Remember, try not to blow anything up. The paperwork is a nightmare. I'll do my best," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "but no promises." "You know how much I love a good explosion." Vexel trudged through the colony, passing by a trio of techs arguing over whether a bolt was metric or imperial. "Metric, you morons," he felt like shouting. But he had bigger fish to fry, like figuring out why the hell he was here in the first place. The readings had been coming from deep beneath the colony, somewhere in the old mining tunnels. The tunnels, of course, were a relic from when people thought mining the moon was a good idea. Now, they were mostly used by kids playing hide and seek, or by adults playing hide and never seek. Vexel reached the entrance to the tunnels, the air around it cold enough to freeze a politician's heart. He flicked on his suit's light, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife through butter, if the butter was made of pitch-black despair. The tunnel stretched into the moon's guts, and Vexel stepped inside, every footfall echoing ominously. "Ah, the sweet embrace of potential death," he murmured, feeling right at home. As he ventured deeper, his thoughts drifted to the absurdity of his situation. Here he was, a glorified errand boy for Earth's bureaucratic overlords, risking his neck to investigate what was probably just another busted geothermal vent. But the readings, they had been strange, even for this place. Quantum fluctuations that seemed to mock the laws of physics. Probably just the moon messing with us because it can, he thought, grinning to himself. After what felt like an eternity of trudging through lunar dust and debris, Vexel's light caught something unusual, a doorway half buried in rubble. It was ancient, older than the colony itself, judging by the faded symbols etched into its surface. "Well, hello there, mystery," he said, his curiosity piqued. With a grunt and a heave, Vexel cleared the debris, revealing a chamber beyond the door. The air inside was still, untouched by time or humans. As he stepped in, his boots crunched on the ground, each step a reminder that he was trespassing in history's forgotten corner. In the center of the chamber lay the source of the readings, a peculiar artifact, humming with energy that seemed to defy explanation. It was an intricate contraption, all whirring gears and glowing crystals, a cosmic Rubik's Cube of doom. Vexel approached, cautious but fascinated. "What are you hiding, little fella?" he asked, though he wasn't expecting an answer. His comm unit crackled to life again, Jory's voice pulling him back to reality. "Vexel, you find anything, just a room full of disappointment and the looming possibility of death. You know, the usual, lovely. Anything I should worry about, other than the fact that I have no idea what this thing is?" "Probably not. Well, don't get too cozy. Remember, report back as soon as you can. And for God's sake, don't touch anything." Jory sounded almost motherly, which was unsettling in its own right. Vexel chuckled, eyeing the artifact with a mix of intrigue and trepidation. "Touch it, me? Never." With the comm line dead, he turned his full attention back to the artifact. It looked like someone had taken a bunch of old clock parts and sprinkled in some cosmic fairy dust. The kind of thing that screamed, "Poke me," in the most ominous way possible. He circled the artifact, noting the way it pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, like a heart beating out of sync with the universe. "Well, aren't you just the prettiest Pandora's box?" he mused, feeling the pull of curiosity. His hand hovered over it, hesitating only slightly before giving in to temptation. "Ah, screw it," he said, touching the surface. Immediately, the room filled with a bright glow, and he felt a strange sensation ripple through him, like standing too close to a subwoofer at a bad concert. He jumped back, heart racing. "Well, that was enlightening," he gasped, shaking his head to clear it. The chamber seemed unchanged, but there was a new tension in the air, like the universe had just taken notice of him. As if he hadn't already had enough of that. He stepped back, studying the artifact, wondering if he had just signed up for more trouble than usual. "Great, just what I needed, a cosmic headache," he muttered, turning to leave. He'd barely reached the door when the artifact's glow intensified, bathing the chamber in an eerie light. A low hum filled the air, escalating into a sound that was almost a voice. Vexel froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. "Oh, this can't be good," he thought, the realization dawning that he might have stumbled onto something far bigger than a broken lunar colony. The voice, if it was a voice, was speaking in a language that wasn't quite sound, more like an invasive thought worming its way into his mind. "Nope, definitely not good," he confirmed to himself. He backed away slowly, trying to make sense of the situation. "Okay, Tarrant, you've done it now." Found the cosmic equivalent of a haunted house. The glow from the artifact began to subside, but the sense of being watched, of being weighed and measured by something beyond his understanding, lingered. It was the kind of feeling that made you want to check your closet for monsters. With a shaky breath, Vexel made his way out of the chamber, every instinct screaming at him to put as much distance between him and the artifact as possible. His mind raced with questions, each more unsettling than the last. As he emerged back into the tunnel, the darkness felt almost comforting, a familiar cloak to hide his growing unease. "Well, Jory, I hope you're ready for one hell of a report," he said to himself, knowing that whatever he'd uncovered, it was only the beginning. He began the long trek back to the surface, each step tinged with the knowledge that he'd just scratched the surface of something monumental and possibly catastrophic. His thoughts were a chaotic swirl of potential consequences, but one thing was clear: the mystery of Selene 9 had only just begun. By the time he reached the colony, the sense of foreboding had settled into a dull throb at the back of his mind. He paused at the tunnel's entrance, looking back one last time, half expecting to see a glowing figure following him. "Next time, remind me to take up a hobby that's less likely to kill me," he told himself with a wry grin, before stepping back into the flickering lights of Selene 9. The colony was as he'd left it, chaotic, decaying, and blissfully ignorant of the potential apocalypse brewing beneath their feet. And for a fleeting moment, he envied them. Back in the colony, Vexel headed straight for the comm center, his mind set on getting the word out as soon as possible. Jory needed to hear about this, and he was sure she would appreciate the midnight panic call. "Well, Vex, you've done it again. Found yourself knee-deep in cosmic crap," he reflected, the sense of impending doom a familiar companion. As he dialed Earth, he couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here he was, a lone human on a crumbling moon colony, caught in the crosshairs of a mystery that defied logic. All in a day's work, he thought, as the comm link buzzed, waiting for Jory to pick up and for the chaos to truly begin. Vexel Tarrant had never been the kind of guy to voluntarily engage with intellectuals, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The colony's resident brainiac was Dr. Isra Corvin, a quantum physicist masquerading as a human. She was probably the only person on Selene 9 who could make sense of the cosmic Rubik's Cube he'd found. He wasn't sure what it said about him that, when confronted with what might be a doomsday device, his first thought was, find someone smarter to deal with it. Walking through the colony's labyrinthine corridors, he couldn't help but notice the delightful fragrance of stale air mixed with a hint of burnt circuitry, a signature scent of Selene 9. The kind of place that made you want to find the nearest airlock and take a deep breath. He finally reached Dr. Corvin's lab, which looked like a tornado had gone on a blind date with a science fair. Bits of tech and paper were strewn everywhere, each surface a testament to organized chaos. Vexel paused, considering turning around and letting the apocalypse handle itself. But he was already knee-deep in cosmic crap, so he took a breath, regretting it immediately due to the aforementioned aroma, and knocked on the door frame. "Doc, got a minute? Or, potentially the rest of our lives, Doctor." Corvin looked up from whatever Frankenstein's monster of science she was working on, squinting at him through glasses thick enough to double as windows. "Vexel," she said, in a tone that suggested she was about as thrilled to see him as she would be to find a rat in her cereal. "What do you want?" "Found something in the tunnels," Vexel replied, trying to sound casual about the whole possible cosmic weapon thing. "Thought you might want to take a look before we all end up as space dust." Her interest piqued. She put down her tools and gave him her full attention. "This better not be another one of your funny pranks. Doc, if I wanted to prank you, I'd hide your favorite mug again," he said with a grin. "This is serious. Serious enough that I came to you for help instead of just running for the hills." That seemed to do the trick. She stood, dusting off her lab coat, which probably hadn't been white since it left the factory. "All right, Vexel, show me what you've got." As they made their way back to the tunnels, Vexel filled her in on the details or lack thereof. "So, it's like an ancient Etch-a-Sketch but with more doom and less fun," he summarized. "An artifact giving off quantum fluctuations. Fascinating. And you just touched it." "Hey, it was glowing and humming. What was I supposed to do, not touch it?" "That's like putting a big red button in front of a monkey and saying don't press, Doctor." Corvin rolled her eyes but pressed on, clearly used to Vexel's brand of idiocy. When they reached the chamber, she stepped inside, her eyes widening as she took in the artifact. "Amazing," she breathed, the excitement in her voice palpable. "This might predate the galaxy itself." "Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's older than my grandma," Vexel quipped, though in truth he was feeling a bit out of his depth. "Doctor." Corvin moved closer to the artifact, her fingers grazing its surface with the reverence of a true scientist. "If this is what I think it is, it could be a weapon of unimaginable power." "Great. Because that's just what we need, more things that can vaporize us." Ignoring his sarcasm, she began to examine the artifact's intricate mechanisms, her mind racing with possibilities. "We have to be careful. Anything with this kind of power usually comes with some sort of security protocol." As if on cue, the artifact's hum deepened, and the chamber lights flickered ominously. Vexel felt his stomach do a somersault, which would have been impressive if he weren't overwhelmed by the urge to puke. Doc," he said, backing away, "I think we might have poked the bear." No, Doctor," Corvin muttered, frantically checking her scanner. "It's activating a lockdown sequence. This whole place will seal itself off from the rest of the colony." "Fantastic. So what, we're about to become fancy moon fossils?" She shot him a scathing look. "Not if I can help it. We need to override the system or we're toast." Vexel had many talents, dodging responsibility, creative excuses, and mixing a mean cocktail, but hacking ancient alien technology wasn't one of them. Still, he wasn't about to sit back and watch the world end. "What do you need from me?" Her response was immediate, a machine gun burst of instructions that made his head spin. "I need access to the colony's mainframe. We can use it to send a signal to the artifact, potentially bypassing the lockdown." "Great. I'll just waltz over there and hack into the mainframe like I know what I'm doing," he said, already moving towards the exit. As he left the chamber, the hum of the artifact grew louder, echoing in his ears like a cosmic migraine. He sprinted through the tunnels, desperate to reach the colony's central hub before it was too late. If they didn't act fast, Selene 9 would be sealed up tighter than a miser's wallet. Back in the colony, chaos was beginning to spread. Alarms blared and people were rushing about, panic painted across their faces. Vexel shoved his way through the crowd, the urgency of the situation fueling his steps. He burst into the comm center, startling the techs inside. "I need access to the mainframe," he barked, trying to sound authoritative despite the fact that he was wearing a suit that smelled like a burnt vacuum cleaner. The techs looked at each other, then back at him. "And who are you supposed to be?" Vexel flashed a grin that was all teeth and no humor. "The guy who's gonna make sure we don't end up as space dust. Now move." With considerable reluctance, they stepped aside and Vexel approached the terminal. He could feel sweat trickling down his neck, and not just because the colony's cooling system was on the fritz again. He fumbled with the controls, his fingers more accustomed to pulling triggers than typing commands. But somehow, he managed to access the mainframe, his mind a jumbled mess of half-remembered manuals and pure desperation. "Okay, Vexel, don't screw this up," he muttered, as he navigated the system. He was dimly aware of Dr. Corvin coming through on his comm unit, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. "Vexel, you need to input the following sequence, 4-2RGH. Got it." He punched in the code, half expecting the terminal to explode in his face. But instead, the alarms began to quiet, the lights stabilizing as the colony's systems responded to the override. Dr. Corvin's voice came through again, tinged with relief. "You did it. The lockdown's halted for now. But we need to figure out what triggered it in the first place." "Yeah, because I was hoping this day would end with a nice game of cosmic chess," he replied, exhaustion creeping into his voice. "Any idea who's behind the lockdown? Could be the artifact itself or whoever created it. But if they are still out there, they know we found something we shouldn't have." "Wonderful. So, now we're on some ancient alien's hit list." Just what I needed. He could almost hear her roll her eyes through the comm link. "Vexel, this is serious. We need to secure the artifact and find a way to communicate with whoever's out there." "Sure. Let me just grab my tinfoil hat and message the Moon Men." Ignoring his sarcasm, she continued, "Meet me back at the lab. We need to analyze the artifact's signal and figure out how to respond." "On my way," he said, already heading for the door. "Just hope we have enough time before things go from bad to apocalyptic." As he made his way back, Vexel couldn't shake the feeling that they were on borrowed time. The artifact was a loaded gun, and they were standing at the wrong end of the barrel. But there was no turning back now. They had to find a way to stop whatever endgame was in motion, or they'd all be history. Back at the lab, Dr. Corvin was already deep into her work, surrounded by a forest of screens displaying data that made Vexel's head spin. "Welcome to the nerve center," she said, not looking up from her terminal. "Nice place. Cozy. Got any snacks?" "Focus, Vexel. We need to decipher this signal or we're toast." He resisted the urge to point out that toast sounded pretty good right about now. Instead, he joined her at the terminal, trying to make sense of the data. "So, what's the plan? Try to outsmart something that's probably smarter than us." "Exactly. The artifact's emitting a frequency that might allow us to communicate back. We just need to find the right wavelength." "Great. Let's just hope it's not expecting a formal introduction." The minutes ticked by as they worked, the pressure mounting with every second. Vexel could feel the weight of impending doom bearing down on him, and he forced himself to focus, to keep moving forward. Finally, Dr. Corvin let out a triumphant noise, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Got it. We've isolated the signal. Now we just need to send a response." "And what are we saying? Hello, please don't kill us." Something like that, but in a way they'll understand. As she prepared the transmission, Vexel couldn't help but feel a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. They were playing with forces beyond their comprehension, like kids with a chemistry set unaware that it might explode. With a deep breath, Dr. Corvin initiated the transmission, sending their message into the void. Vexel held his breath, waiting for the universe to respond, half expecting the whole colony to blow up right then and there, but nothing happened. The seconds stretched into an eternity, the silence more oppressive than the loudest alarm. Vexel shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing with possibilities. Had they succeeded, failed, pissed off some ancient deity? Just as he was about to crack a joke to ease the tension, the screens flickered, the data shifting to display a new pattern. Doctor, Corvin's eyes widened as she scanned the information, her expression a mix of awe and fear. They responded. They're acknowledging our presence. Vexel felt a shiver run down his spine, the realization sinking in. They weren't alone, and whatever they'd uncovered was far from finished. Well, that's just peachy. What's next? A welcoming party, Doctor. Corvin shook her head, her voice grim. We have to be ready for anything. This is only the beginning. Yeah, figures, Vexel said, trying to sound nonchalant even as his heart pounded in his chest. Guess we better buckle up. Things are about to get interesting. With that, they braced themselves for whatever came next, knowing that the fate of Selene 9, and maybe more, hung in the balance. It was a fine day to be alive in the universe, where every new mystery brought with it the tantalizing promise of death and destruction. And despite everything, Vexel couldn't help but grin. After all, in a universe ready to kill you at any moment, the least you could do was smile back. Vexel Tarrant didn't sign up for this mess, but here he was, knee-deep in interstellar politics and ancient alien mysteries. His comm unit buzzed incessantly like an angry wasp, a reminder that he couldn't avoid the inevitable shitstorm brewing around the artifact. The colony's political factions were already sharpening their knives, eager to carve up whatever power the artifact promised like a Thanksgiving turkey. He trudged back to Dr. Corvin's lab, where the flickering lights and smell of burnt circuitry felt like home. As he entered, Dr. Corvin was already pacing, her expression a mix of annoyance and determination. Vexel, the council wants an emergency meeting. They're fighting over who gets to control the artifact. Of course they do, Vexel replied, leaning against a cluttered desk, trying to ignore the throbbing headache forming behind his eyes. Nothing like a good power struggle to spice things up. Who's leading the charge this time? The usual self-important blowhards. Governor Klein and his loyalists want exclusive access, naturally. But the miners are pushing back. They think they should have a say, considering it was found in their tunnels. Vexel groaned. They think. I bet half of them think quantum physics is a new brand of moonshine, Doctor. Corvin managed a tight smile. Don't underestimate them. Desperation makes people resourceful, yeah, and resourceful people make things explode. What's the plan? We need to present a united front. Convince them that for now the artifact needs to stay under scientific observation. Otherwise, it'll be a free-for-all with off-worlders joining the party. Vexel rubbed his temples. Great. Just what we need, extra guests. He paused, considering the implications. Speaking of which, heard anything about off-worlders? She nodded, the tension in her shoulders apparent. Intel suggests that a few groups picked up on the activation signal. They're on their way, likely to grab what they can and run. Fantastic. So now we're not just dealing with local idiots but well-funded off-world idiots too, pretty much. We have to act fast, secure the artifact before they arrive. Vexel couldn't help but laugh, a dry, humorless sound. A suicide mission, then. Just my style before Dr. Corvin could respond. A voice cut through the static of his comm unit. Jory, his handler, sounded more irritated than usual. Vexel, what's this nonsense I hear about alien artifacts and colony lockdowns? You were supposed to keep things quiet. Funny thing about alien doomsday devices, Jory. They're not very discreet, Vexel replied, scratching at the stubble on his chin. Besides, the whole quiet thing went out the airlock when the artifact started humming. Jory sighed, the sound of someone clearly at the end of their tether. Just don't make it worse. The board's already having fits, too late for that. Look, things are heating up here. Factions are at each other's throats and we've got off-world visitors en route. We need to handle this and fast, fine. But for God's sake, Vexel, try not to blow anything up. Can't make any promises. Cutting the connection, Vexel turned back to Dr. Corvin. All right, Doc. Let's do this. Time for a little diplomacy, space station style. They made their way to the council chamber, where the air was thick with tension and the unmistakable aroma of desperation. The chamber was a drab, utilitarian space, worn down by years of bickering and petty squabbles. Vexel stepped in with the confidence of a man who knew he had nothing left to lose. Governor Klein was already there, a stout man with a voice like gravel in a blender. "I demand to know who's in charge of this operation," he barked, his eyes narrowing as Vexel approached. "That'd be me," Vexel said, offering his best lopsided grin. "Vexel Tarrant, professional at not dying. And what makes you qualified to handle something of this magnitude? Oh, you know, the usual, saving the colony from imploding, drinking my weight in cheap whiskey. The kind of stuff they don't teach in your fancy government schools." A ripple of laughter ran through the room, though Klein didn't seem amused. He leaned forward, his bulk casting a shadow over the table. "This isn't a joke, Tarrant. The artifact is of unimaginable importance." Vexel shrugged. "Importance, power, shiny buttons, call it what you like. But if we don't handle this right, we'll all be space dust." The miner's representative, a wiry woman named Tessa, piped up. "And you think you can handle it better than us?" "I know how to handle a live grenade," Vexel said, fingers tapping absent-mindedly on the table. "That's more than I can say for most of you." "Enough, Doctor," Corvin interjected, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs. "We need to keep the artifact under scientific observation for now. It's the only way to ensure the colonists' safety." Klein's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. "Fine. But if there's a chance it can benefit us, we'll revisit this. Sure, we'll pencil that in after not dying on the agenda," Vexel said, pushing back from the table. The council reluctantly agreed to let Dr. Corvin and Vexel continue their work, at least until the off-world forces arrived. As the meeting adjourned, Vexel couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a game where everyone was guessing the rules. He and Dr. Corvin returned to the lab, the tension still hanging over them like a guillotine blade. "Well, that went about as well as a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest," Vexel said, flopping into a chair. "It's a temporary reprieve," Dr. Corvin replied, her eyes fixed on the artifact. "But we need to prepare for the off-worlders. They won't be interested in negotiating. Great. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and about to be outmanned. Any bright ideas?" She turned to him, a glint of determination in her eyes. "We need to decipher more of the artifact's technology. If we can understand its defenses, we might have a chance." Vexel nodded, trying not to think about the odds stacked against them. "All right then. Let's crack this nut before someone else tries to steal it." The next few hours passed in a blur of data analysis and caffeine-fueled determination. Vexel struggled to keep up with Dr. Corvin's rapid-fire explanations, his mind a jumble of circuits and quantum theories that sounded more like alphabet soup. Eventually, they hit a breakthrough. Dr. Corvin's eyes lit up as she examined the readouts. "This is it. The artifact has a defensive system tied to the colony's infrastructure. We can use it to our advantage." "Defensive system? You mean like a force field or something?" "Exactly. If we can integrate it with the colony's mainframe, we could shield ourselves from external threats." Vexel grinned. "Now that sounds like a plan I can get behind. Let's make this place a fortress." As they worked, the reality of their situation loomed large. The off-worlders were coming and they had to be ready. The artifact was their only hope, a beacon of potential salvation or destruction, depending on how well they played their cards. Vexel's comm unit buzzed again, Jory's voice edged with tension. "Vexel, I've got more bad news. The off-worlders are closer than we thought. They'll be here in less than a day." "Perfect. Any idea who we're dealing with?" "Rumor has it, a faction called the Celestial Syndicate. Mercenaries with a penchant for scavenging alien tech. Just what we needed, space pirates with delusions of grandeur." "Stay sharp, Vexel. I'll do what I can from my end, but we're counting on you." As the connection cut, Vexel turned to Dr. Corvin, his expression grim. "Looks like our timeline just got tighter. Let's hope this defensive system works." She nodded, her focus unwavering. "We'll make it work. We have to." With the clock ticking down, Vexel couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, a reminder that their survival rested on a knife edge. But despite the odds, he couldn't help but smile. It was the kind of situation that called for a drink and a bad joke, the perfect blend of chaos and opportunity. And if he was going to face the end of the world, he'd do it with a grin and a middle finger to the universe. After all, what was life without a little madness? Vexel Tarrant stared at the blinking console like it owed him money. He scratched absently at his chin, trying to make sense of the jumble of graphs and numbers that Dr. Corvin assured him was a breakthrough. It looked like a cat had walked over a keyboard. "Are we sure this isn't just a fancy screensaver?" he asked, trying to sound less impressed. Dr. Corvin rolled her eyes, a gesture she'd perfected in the face of his sarcasm. "Trust me, this is progress. We can use the artifact's quantum properties to secure the colony. It just needs a little more fine-tuning. A little more fine-tuning. That's like saying a shuttle with a missing wing needs a touch-up. Maybe, but it's the best shot we've got," she said, determination etched into her features. "All right then," Vexel conceded with a sigh. "Let's get this show on the road. We've got off-worlders inbound, and I'd rather not greet them with an open airlock policy." As they dove into the work, the lab felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Every beep of the console was a reminder of the ticking clock. Every flicker of the overhead lights a nod to the colony's decrepit infrastructure. If Selene 9 had a motto, it'd be held together by duct tape and sheer stubbornness. The plan was simple, as all desperate plans should be. Use the artifact's defensive capability to turn the colony into a fortress, a last stand against the impending horde of space scavengers. It was genius, if you ignored the fact that it was also completely untested. "Hey, if this works, you'll be famous," Vexel quipped, more to himself than her. "The woman who turned an alien Rubik's Cube into a planetary shield. I'm not in this for fame," Dr. Corvin replied, her eyes not leaving the console. "I just want to keep us alive." Spoken like a true hero, Vexel said with a grin. "Which makes me what? The comic relief. The sidekick, more like the unfortunate soul dragged into a mess beyond his comprehension." Fair enough. Just as things were beginning to look like they might hold together, Vexel's comm unit buzzed with a message that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The voice was low, almost a whisper, and unmistakably human. "Vexel, it's Tessa from the miners. We've got a problem. There's been sabotage, sabotage." Vexel repeated, his heart sinking. "What the hell happened? Someone's tampered with the power grid. We're looking at a breach if it's not fixed, and fast." Vexel swore under his breath, as if they didn't have enough to deal with. Still, it wasn't like the universe to throw problems at them one at a time. "We're on our way," he said, glancing at Dr. Corvin. "Looks like we've got a snake in the garden." "Of course we do," she replied, packing up equipment quickly. It wouldn't be a party without one. The two hurried through the colony's dim corridors, the smell of burnt circuitry all too familiar. Selene 9 always had that distinct aroma, like someone had tried to cook a steak with a faulty plasma torch. By the time they reached the power grid, it was a scene of organized chaos. Sparks flew like celebratory fireworks, and the air was thick with the acrid tang of singed metal. Tessa was there, barking orders at a couple of engineers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Glad you could make it," she said, her voice full of sarcasm. "This is quite the mess." Vexel surveyed the damage. "Looks like someone's been playing connect the dots with our wiring." "Yeah, and they weren't aiming for a pretty picture," Tessa replied, crossing her arms. "Any idea who's behind it? If I had to guess, I'd say someone not very fond of the not dying plan," Vexel said. "Any suspects?" "A few, but none that scream sabotage for breakfast." "Well, whoever it is, they've got lousy timing," Dr. Corvin said, examining the damage. "We need to fix this before the off-worlders arrive, or our defenses aren't worth squat." "Easier said than done," Tessa muttered. "Half the grid's fried. We'll be lucky if we can power a toaster, let alone a defense system." "Then we better get lucky," Vexel said, rolling up his sleeves. "Start stripping any non-essential systems for parts. We'll make do with what we've got." As they worked, Vexel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Sabotage didn't just happen, it was orchestrated, planned. But by who? And for what purpose? The question hung over him like a bad smell. The Iors ticked by, a blur of swapping fuses and cursing at stubborn circuitry. The colony's power grid was a relic from a bygone era, and it showed. Every time they thought they'd made progress, another problem reared its ugly head. Remember when things were simple? Vexel asked, more to himself than anyone. Doctor, Corvin shot him a look. You mean before alien devices and space pirates? Yeah. Simpler times, right? I think you've got some rose-tinted glasses on, Tessa said, her tone dry. Selene 9's always been a headache, true, Vexel admitted. But at least it was a headache without off-world mercenaries breathing down our necks. Eventually, they managed to rig something that might just hold together. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional, if you didn't look too closely or sneeze near it. All right, Vexel said, wiping sweat from his brow. What's the verdict? Are we ready to turn this thing on, Doctor? Corvin hesitated, her finger hovering over the control panel. As ready as we'll ever be. But once we activate it, there's no turning back. We either hold the line or we find out what being spaced feels like, Vexel finished. Let's do it. With a deep breath, Dr. Corvin activated the system. The artifact hummed to life, its circuits glowing with an otherworldly light. For a moment, Vexel almost felt hopeful. The defense system engaged with a whirring sound that filled the room. Vexel could almost imagine the colony covered in a protective cocoon, safe from the impending storm, but only if their jerry-rigged solution held. Tessa watched the display, her face a mask of worry. Let's hope this keeps the wolves at bay. Hope's good and all, Vexel said, trying to sound confident. But a little paranoia never hurt anyone. Speak for yourself, Doctor, Corvin muttered, eyes fixed on the console. Just then Vexel's comm unit buzzed again, a sound that had quickly become synonymous with bad news. Jory's voice crackled through, sounding frazzled. Vexel, we've got a problem. A big one, of course we do, Vexel replied, bracing himself. Lay it on me. The Celestial Syndicate's ships are in orbit. They'll be landing any time now. You've got maybe an Ior before they breach the colony. Fantastic. Just enough time to brew a cup of coffee and panic. Keep it together, Vexel. We're counting on you. The connection cut, leaving Vexel staring at the comm unit like it had personally offended him. He turned to Dr. Corvin and Tessa, trying to muster some semblance of leadership. All right, folks. We've got an Ior to turn this place into an impenetrable fortress. Let's make it count, Doctor. Corvin nodded, her expression resolute. We'll hold the line. No matter what. Damn right, Tessa said, a fierce look in her eyes. This is our home, and I like breathing, Vexel added. With the off-worlders closing in, the stakes had never been higher. They were outnumbered, under-equipped, and on the brink of disaster. But if there was one thing Vexel knew, it was that desperate people could achieve the impossible when pushed. As they prepared for the impending assault, Vexel couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of excitement. It was the kind of situation that might end in flames, but at least he'd get one hell of a story out of it, assuming he survived to tell it. The minutes ticked by, a countdown to chaos. Vexel and his ragtag team worked tirelessly, each step taken as if it might be their last. The colony was a powder keg and the off-worlders were a lit match heading straight for it. Do you think we'll make it? Tessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Depends on your definition of making it, Vexel replied. But if we go down, let's take some of them with us, Doctor. Corvin smirked. That's the spirit. Anything less would be boring. As they braced for the inevitable, Vexel couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a motley crew of misfits and scientists, standing against a horde of mercenaries with nothing but hope and a jerry-rigged defense system. Here's to not dying, Vexel said, raising an imaginary glass. To not dying, Doctor, Corvin and Tessa echoed, their voices filled with determination. The air was charged with anticipation, the kind that only came before a storm. And as the first signs of the Celestial Syndicate's presence began to manifest, Vexel knew that whatever happened next would be talked about for years to come, assuming they lived to tell the tale. The comms unit buzzed again. Vexel jumped like a cat who'd just noticed a cucumber, but no message, just static. The damn thing was malfunctioning again. Like everything else on Selene 9, it seemed to operate on hope and duct tape. He gave it a whack for good measure, a tried-and-true method known as percussive maintenance. Great. Now even my comm unit is sabotaging me, Vexel muttered, stuffing it back into his pocket. He didn't have time to deal with another technical nightmare. The colony was already a powder keg waiting for a stray spark. Vexel, Doctor, Corvin shouted over the noise of clattering tools and the occasional electrical sizzle. We've got a bigger problem than we thought. The artifact's energy is destabilizing the infrastructure. He quirked an eyebrow. Oh, wonderful. The Doomsday Rubik's Cube is having a tantrum, Doctor. Corvin frowned, her expression somewhere between exasperation and concern. This isn't a joke. The energy levels are spiking unpredictably. If we don't contain it, Selene 9 might tear itself apart before anyone else gets the chance. Fantastic. Spontaneous self-destruction. Just what we needed. Vexel ran a hand through his hair, feeling the grit and grime that seemed to be a permanent part of his existence these days. Any brilliant ideas? I'm working on it, she replied, eyes glued to her flickering console. But the artifact's quantum properties are beyond anything I've seen. It's like trying to play chess with a board that keeps changing shape. Pawn to what the hell, Vexel quipped. But it was a hollow attempt at humor even by his standards. The weight of their predicament was pressing down like an oppressive fog, and there was no clear way out. Tessa approached, her face set in a grim line. We've got more than energy spikes to worry about. The sabotage cut deeper than we thought. Half the systems we rigged are already failing. Well, isn't that just peachy, Vexel said, sarcasm dripping from every syllable. Anything else? Maybe a meteor shower or an alien invasion for good measure, Tessa snorted, a rare glimmer of amusement cutting through her tension. Don't tempt fate. It's got a twisted sense of humor, Vexel sighed, glancing at the mess of wires sprawled out like a technological autopsy. All right. We need to patch this up before the whole colony turns into cosmic confetti. Suggestions. Divert power from any non-essential systems, Dr. Corvin said, tapping furiously at her console. We need every ounce of energy focused on stabilizing the artifact. Got it, Tessa replied, already moving to execute the plan. Vexel rubbed his temples. Running on fumes and adrenaline, he felt like a man trying to hold the ocean back with a teacup. Still, there was no time for self-pity. If they didn't keep it together, there wouldn't be a together left to keep. Hey, Vex, Tessa called, a note of urgency in her voice. We've got company. He spun around, his eyes following her pointing finger to a nearby monitor. The display flickered, showing the unmistakable shapes of Syndicate ships hovering on the edge of the colony's perimeter. Well, shit, Vexel muttered. Looks like the party's starting, Doctor. Corvin narrowed her eyes. We need more time. The system's not ready. Join the club, Vexel said. Nothing here is ready. We're like a circus act waiting for the big top to collapse. But we can't let them get the artifact, Tessa insisted, her expression fierce. If they get their hands on it. I know, Vexel interrupted. They'll use it, sell it, or turn it into something that makes our current predicament look like a picnic. But right now, we focus on keeping this piece of junk from falling apart. The lights above them flickered ominously, a reminder of their precarious situation. Vexel felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss, waiting for the abyss to get bored and push him in. All right, here's the plan, Vexel said, trying to sound authoritative. Corvin, keep working on the artifact stabilization. Tessa, you and I will handle the defense grid. We've got to buy her as much time as possible, sure. Let's just tell the Syndicate to hold off until we're good and ready, Tessa replied dryly. I'm sure they'll be accommodating, Vexel chuckled despite himself. Yeah, and maybe they'll bring cookies. They moved quickly, urgency in their every step. The corridors of Selene 9 seemed darker, the shadows longer, as if the colony itself was mourning its imminent demise. But there was no time to dwell on metaphors. They had a job to do, and failure wasn't an option, unless you considered getting vaporized a form of success. The control room for the defense grid was a cramped space filled with old consoles that looked like they'd barely survived the last century. Vexel took his place at one of the panels, fingers flying over the controls with an ease born of desperation. "Okay, let's see if we can coax some life out of these relics," he muttered. "Tessa, activate the perimeter defenses." "On it," she replied, her focus unflinching. The screen sprang to life, displaying a series of readouts that were less than encouraging. The defense grid was barely operational, and the syndicate ships were closing in fast. Not the kind of odds that inspired confidence. "Looks like we've got a few turrets online," Tessa reported, glancing at the displays. "But they are running on fumes. We'll be lucky if they manage more than a few warning shots." "Then we make those shots count," Vexel said, jaw set with determination. "We're not going down without a fight." He tapped a series of commands into his console, praying to any cosmic entity that might be listening for a miracle. Beside him, Tessa did the same, her fingers moving with a speed born of urgency. The defense turrets hummed to life, their mechanical limbs twitching like restless arthritic spiders. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. And as the first syndicate ship broke through the perimeter, Vexel realized it would have to be enough. "Here they come," Tessa said, her voice a mix of dread and resolve. "Let's give them a warm welcome," Vexel replied, his finger hovering over the fire command. The turrets fired, spitting energy bolts into the void. The first syndicate ship weaved deftly, evading the barrage with frustrating ease. But it wasn't unscathed. A lucky shot clipped its wing, sending it spiraling back out of range. "One down, who knows how many more to go," Vexel said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "They're regrouping," Tessa noted, eyes fixed on the displays. "Of course they are," Vexel muttered. "It's like they've done this before." He was about to make another snarky remark when the comm unit buzzed, this time with a signal that cut through the haze of static. Jory's voice crackled through, sounding even more frazzled than before. "Vexel, the syndicate's not just here for the artifact. They've got an inside man. Someone's feeding them intel." "Great," Vexel replied, not entirely surprised. "Any idea who?" "No, but if I were you, I'd keep an eye on everyone." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Vexel said dryly as the connection cut again. "Now we've got to worry about traitors too," Tessa overheard and grimaced. "As if we didn't have enough on our plate." "Yeah, it's like a buffet of bullshit," Vexel agreed. "But we've got to keep going." With renewed focus, they worked to keep the defense grid operational, each minute feeling like an eternity. The syndicate ships were regrouping for another assault, and the colony's infrastructure continued to groan under the strain of the artifact's energy. "Corvin, how's it looking on your end?" Vexel asked over the comms. "Not great," she admitted. "I'm holding things together with hope and coffee." "Sounds about right. We're doing the same over here." Another wave of syndicate ships surged forward and the turrets fired in response. It was a chaotic dance of fire and metal, each side testing the other's limits. Vexel's pulse raced, his heart pounding like a drum of war. But it wasn't enough. The syndicate's numbers were overwhelming and their ships more advanced. The defense grid was faltering, systems failing one after the other like a line of dominoes. And amid the chaos, the colony itself seemed to shudder, structural integrity pushed to its limits. "Damn it," Vexel cursed as another console sparked and died. "This isn't sustainable," Tessa said, frustration and fear etched on her face. "We can't hold them off much longer." He knew she was right, but admitting defeat wasn't an option. Not yet. Not while they still had breath in their lungs and a scrap of hope to cling to. "We keep fighting," Vexel said firmly. "Because if we don't, we're already dead." As if in response to his defiance, a new signal blipped on the radar. A ship, but not syndicate. Something else. Something unexpected. Vexel," Tessa said, a mix of confusion and curiosity in her voice. "We've got another ship coming in. Unidentified," he frowned, glancing at the display. "Just what we needed. Another wild card. Should we shoot first and ask questions later?" Vexel hesitated. It was tempting given their situation, but they couldn't afford unnecessary enemies. "No." Let's see who it is first, he decided, though every instinct screamed against it. They watched as the unidentified ship approached, its trajectory suggesting an intent to help, or at least not immediately blow them into space dust. For a brief moment, Vexel dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd caught a break. "Let's hope they come in peace," he said, half joking, half praying. "Or at least with worse aim than the Syndicate," Tessa added, a wry grin tugging at her lips. The ship entered Selene 9's airspace, and Vexel held his breath, waiting to see whether this unknown entity was friend or foe, or something even more complicated. Just another twist in a day full of them, on a colony held together by hope, duct tape, and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. As they prepared for the next chapter of their grim tale, Vexel couldn't help but think that whatever happened next, it was bound to be interesting. Assuming, of course, they lived to see it. The unidentified ship settled into Selene 9's airspace with all the grace of a drunk swan trying to land on a frozen lake. Vexel watched it with a mix of trepidation and grudging admiration. Whoever was piloting that thing either had nerves of steel or a complete disregard for their own safety. Maybe both. Tessa shot him a sidelong glance, one eyebrow raised. "So, what's the plan, Captain?" "Plan," Vexel snorted. "We're in a room full of unreliable tech, facing a hostile fleet with a potentially sentient cube of cosmic chaos in our basement. Plans are for people who aren't us." She nodded, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Good. I thought you might have been replaced by someone sane." As they watched, the ship's landing gear extended and it touched down with a soft thud that Vexel felt through his boots. It wasn't blowing them up yet, so that was something. He keyed the comms unit, the static buzz a familiar if obnoxious companion. "Unidentified vessel, state your business. And if it's blowing us to pieces, maybe just turn around." A pause crackled through the connection, then a voice, smooth, relaxed, and dripping with sarcasm, came through. "This is Captain Bryn of the Wayward Star. I'm here to offer some friendly assistance. Saw you were having a bit of a party and I figured I'd RSVP." "Great," Vexel muttered, muting the comm for a moment. "Another comedian, just what we need. What's the harm in letting him help?" Tessa asked. "Worst case, we end up dead, which is already plan B, right?" Vexel sighed. "Fine. Let's see what this Captain Bryn's got up his sleeve." They made their way through the battered corridors to the hangar where the Wayward Star had landed. The air was thick with the smell of burnt circuitry and desperation, a delightful cocktail of doom and gloom. Bryn was waiting for them as the hangar doors slid open, a tall figure with a mop of unruly hair and a smile that screamed trouble. His attire was a mismatched collection of leathers and tech, probably scavenged from a dozen different worlds. "Vexel Tarrant, I presume?" he asked, extending a hand. "Heard a lot about you. All good things, I'm sure," Vexel replied dryly, shaking the offered hand. "Absolutely," Bryn said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Especially the bit about you being knee-deep in a clusterfuck of galactic proportions." Vexel had to chuckle at that. "You fit right in. What's your angle?" "No angle," Bryn said, leaning casually against his ship. "Just a healthy dislike for the Syndicate and a fondness for sticking it to them whenever I can." "Well, you're in the right place," Tessa chimed in. "Any ideas on how we can do that without crumbling like a wet cookie?" Bryn grinned, revealing a set of teeth that could probably double as a light source. "I might have a trick or two, but first I need to see this artifact of yours." Vexel hesitated. The idea of letting a stranger near the cosmic Rubik's Cube wasn't exactly comforting. But then, desperate times called for desperate measures, and they were pretty much the poster children for desperation at this point. "All right," Vexel said finally, "but no funny business." Bryn held up his hands in mock surrender. "Cross my heart." They made their way to Dr. Corvin's lab, the weight of impending doom a constant companion. Inside, the doctor was hunched over her console, a mug of something steaming by her side, probably the only thing keeping her vertical. "Dr. Corvin," Vexel said, clearing his throat. "Meet Captain Bryn, he's here to help." Corvin raised her head, eyes shadowed with fatigue but still sharp. "Help how exactly?" Bryn stepped forward, giving her a roguish grin. "I have a way with puzzles, especially the dangerous ancient kind that tend to make people explode." "Wonderful," she said, deadpan. "Just what we need, a demolition expert." Vexel gestured to the cube, its surface shifting with inscrutable patterns. "It's causing all sorts of havoc, and unless we figure out how to stabilize it, Selene 9 is going to be a very short-lived tourist attraction." Bryn approached the artifact, his expression shifting to something more serious, almost reverent. "Ah, a beauty, isn't she?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device that looked like it had been cobbled together from leftover parts and wishful thinking. "The hell's that?" Tessa asked, peering over his shoulder. "This," Bryn said, brandishing the device with a flourish, "is my key to the universe, or at least a bunch of doors I've found myself locked behind." "Is it going to help or just make a nice paperweight?" Vexel asked, arms crossed. Bryn ignored him, focusing on the artifact. He placed the device against its surface, and it emitted a low hum, faint lights pulsing rhythmically. "The artifact's a quantum matrix, right? Self-generating energy source fluctuating between states, might even be alive in a sense." Corvin looked intrigued despite herself. "How do you know?" Bryn winked. "I read a lot. And I once dated a physicist who wouldn't shut up about quantum theory." "Must have been a real keeper," Vexel quipped, though he was watching intently. "She was," Bryn said, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. "But that's another story for another drink." The device began to glow, matching the artifact's patterns. Bryn leaned closer, muttering to himself, and for a moment the room was filled with a strange symphony of light and sound, like the universe itself was whispering secrets. "Got it," Bryn said finally, stepping back with a satisfied smile. "The artifact's not just a power source, it's a shield, a weapon, a bloody Swiss Army knife if you know how to use it." "And you do?" Vexel asked, skepticism and hope warring in his voice. "Enough to turn the tables," Bryn replied. "But it's risky, very risky." "Define risky," Tessa said, arms akimbo. "Think gunpowder keg next to a fireplace risky," Bryn said, grinning like a man with a death wish. "But if we can tap into its matrix, we can control its output, use it to reinforce the colony's defenses, maybe even give the Syndicate a nasty surprise." Corvin looked thoughtful, her mind already racing ahead. "We focus its energy on the defensive grid, amplify the turrets, and hope they go boom instead of us," Vexel finished for her. "It's insane. But it's our best shot," Tessa said, determination bright in her eyes. Vexel considered their options, or lack thereof. The Syndicate wasn't going to wait around for them to come up with a sensible plan, and any further delay would just bring them closer to catastrophe. "All right," he said, decision made. "Let's do it. But if this backfires, I'm haunting you all from whatever cosmic afterlife I end up in." Bryn clapped his hands together, a gleeful glint in his eyes. "That's the spirit. Now let's make some history, or at least make a hell of a mess trying." As they worked to integrate Bryn's device with the artifact's quantum matrix, the air seemed to thrum with anticipation. Corvin coordinated the technical aspects, while Tessa and Bryn handled the more hands-on adjustments. Vexel, ever the reluctant leader, kept an eye on the monitors, watching for any sign that things were about to go spectacularly wrong. "Everything's set on this end," Corvin said, pushing back from her console. "The colony's systems are ready to receive the boost." Vexel nodded, jaw tight. "Let's hope this doesn't end with us as cosmic debris." "Ready when you are, Captain," Bryn said, his voice steady. "Here goes nothing," Vexel replied, and with a deep breath initiated the connection. The effect was immediate and breathtaking. The artifact pulsed with light, energy flowing through the room like a living thing. It surged into the colony's systems, and for a moment everything seemed to hold its breath. Then with a roar like 1,000 storms breaking free, the colony's defenses came to life. The turrets glowed with a fierce intensity, their beams cutting through the void with newfound power. The Syndicate ships, caught off guard, scrambled to regroup, but now they were the ones on the defensive. Vexel watched the displays with a mix of relief and exhilaration. "We're doing it," he said, disbelief coloring his voice. Don't jinx it, Tessa warned, though she was grinning like a maniac. The turrets fired in unison, a deadly barrage that tore through the syndicate's ranks. Ships exploded into brilliant blossoms of fire and debris, the invaders' numerical advantage rapidly eroding. It was as if the artifact itself had decided to join the fight, its energy an extension of their defiance. But even as the tide turned, Vexel knew they weren't out of the woods yet. The artifact's energy was volatile, unpredictable, and there was no guarantee it wouldn't turn on them just as suddenly. We've got to keep this up, Corvin said, her voice urgent. The artifact's stabilizing, but it's not permanent. Bryn, any more tricks up your sleeve? Vexel asked, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Just one, Bryn said, his expression serious. We use the artifact to send a message. Let the Syndicate know they are not welcome. And by message you mean? Tessa prompted. Bryn grinned, all mischief and danger. A nice little shockwave, get them to back off, rethink their life choices. It was a gamble, but what wasn't at this point? Vexel nodded, trusting in the madness that had brought them this far. Do it. Bryn adjusted his device, fingers moving with practiced speed. The artifact responded, its light intensifying, a crescendo of energy building within its core. Everyone brace yourselves, Vexel warned, gripping the edge of a console. The shockwave erupted from the artifact with a force that shook the colony to its foundations. It swept outwards, a tidal wave of shimmering energy that enveloped the Syndicate fleet. The ships shuddered, systems failing under the onslaught, and one by one they began to withdraw, retreating back into the depths of space. Silence descended, a stunned, awestruck silence that felt both surreal and hard-won. The artifact dimmed, its energy stabilizing, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the threat was gone. Vexel looked around at his companions, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. We did it, he said, the words barely a whisper. Tessa let out a whoop of victory, and even Corvin allowed herself a small, relieved smile. Bryn just leaned back, arms crossed, looking annoyingly self-satisfied. Didn't doubt it for a second, he said, winking. Vexel shook his head, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. They'd survived against all odds. And while the future was still uncertain, they'd earned this moment, this fragile, fleeting peace. All right, he said, feeling the weight of responsibility lift, if only slightly. Let's get this place back in working order, and maybe, just maybe, we can finally catch a break. As they set to work, the artifact remained at the heart of the colony, its mysteries still unsolved, its potential yet untapped. But for now, it was content to rest, a silent guardian in a universe full of chaos and possibility. And as Vexel looked out at the stars, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was still room for light, and perhaps a little bit of humor to go with it. The dust settled like an old memory, refusing to fade entirely but softening at the edges. Selene 9 had survived, against all odds and common sense. The colony was still intact mostly. The Syndicate fleet was retreating with its tail tucked firmly between its legs, a cosmic dog getting the boot. Vexel watched the monitors, the afterglow of the battle still flickering. Well, I'm not dead, he muttered. Guess that's a win. Tessa was busy making faces at the console, her version of heroics. Only you could turn a suicidal plan into a mere near-death experience, Captain, Vexel shrugged. It's a gift. Corvin was already back at her station, running diagnostics. The artifact's output is stabilizing, she reported, her voice the usual blend of concern and irritation. But it won't last forever. Story of my life, Vexel said, leaning against the console with a weary sigh. So what did we learn? Bryn, still obnoxiously pleased with himself, joined the conversation. That we're all clinically insane for thinking this would work. And yet here we are, Tessa said, gesturing to the colony that was, for once, not a smoking crater. All right, let's not get sentimental, Vexel said, waving away the moment like an annoying fly. We still have a mess to clean up. And I'm pretty sure the miners will want their tunnels back without an extra helping of unstable artifact. Sure, we'll just dust it off and tell them it's an ancient toaster, Tessa said dryly. Vexel snorted. Yeah, the kind that burns planets instead of bread. They all sat in silence for a moment, letting the reality sink in. They had pulled it off barely, and now came the hard part. The aftermath. The what now of a victory that felt as surreal as it was unlikely. First things first, Vexel said, shaking himself out of his reverie. Let's see if Governor Klein has stopped hiding under his desk. Bryn laughed, a sharp bark of genuine amusement. 10 credits say he's still cowering. Tessa leaned back, crossing her arms. I wouldn't bet against that. All right then, let's shake the old man out of his funk, Vexel said, punching a few buttons on the comm unit. The screen flickered to life, showing the governor's office, which looked less like a seat of power and more like the inside of a bomb shelter. Klein appeared, looking frazzled but undeniably alive. Captain Vexel, he said, trying for authority but landing somewhere around nervous intern. What's the situation? The situation, Vexel replied, tone dripping with irony, is that we're not space dust. You're welcome. Klein managed a shaky nod. Yes, well, I see that. What's the next step? Next step is you tell your political pals to put away their knives and work together for 5 damn minutes, Vexel said. The miners, the scientists, everyone. We need to stabilize this rock before someone else decides to pay us a visit. The governor straightened, finding a shred of courage somewhere under his desk. I'll do what I can, Captain, thank you. Vexel cut the feed, shaking his head. Politicians. Can't live with him, can't blow him out the airlock. Corvin glanced up from her console, arching an eyebrow. And they say you're not diplomatic. Thank the stars for small favors, Vexel said, cracking a grin. Bryn stretched, looking far too relaxed for a man who had just danced with death. Now what, Vexel? More heroics, or do we get a chance to breathe? Breathing sounds good, Vexel said. We'll integrate the artifact's power more permanently, figure out how to use it without lighting ourselves up like a bonfire. Never thought I'd see the day when you play it safe, Tessa quipped. Me neither, Vexel admitted. But there's a first time for everything, even sanity. The crew dispersed, each to their tasks, leaving Vexel alone with his thoughts. He wandered over to the artifact, its once menacing glow now a steady, gentle pulse. You sure you're not alive? He asked it, half joking. You seem to have a mind of your own. The artifact, unsurprisingly, did not respond. But as Vexel stared at it, he felt an odd kinship with the thing. Both of them, relics of a bygone era, misunderstood and occasionally dangerous. All right, you, he said, tapping it gently. Let's keep the fireworks to a minimum, yeah? Bryn approached, hands in his pockets. Talking to it now. Why not? Seems to work with people, Vexel said. Sometimes they even listen. Bryn chuckled. Well, whatever happens next, you did good, Vexel, against the odds and all that. Vexel offered a modest shrug. Just another day saving the universe. They stood in companionable silence, watching as Corvin and Tessa worked around them, the hum of the colony returning to its usual chaotic rhythm. You ever think about what it would be like if things went differently? Bryn asked suddenly. Vexel gave him a sideways glance. Different how? Like, if we hadn't found the artifact. Or if the Syndicate actually had their act together. Sure, Vexel replied, but only for a second. The what-ifs are just a waste of time. I prefer focusing on the what now. Bryn nodded thoughtfully. Practical as ever. Hey, life's short and usually ends in spectacular failure, Vexel said with a grin. Might as well make the most of the in-between bits. True that, Bryn said, clapping him on the back. True that. The brief moment of reflection ended as Tessa walked over, wiping grease from her hands. Looks like we're getting power stabilized, at least for now. Corvin thinks we might even be able to expand the defensive grid. We'll need it, Vexel said. If the Syndicate got wind of this place, others will too. Tessa nodded. And we can't always count on the element of surprise. Or on Bryn's charming personality, Vexel added, earning a snort from Tessa and a mock-offended look from Bryn. Hey, my charm won us this battle, Bryn protested. Sure, Tessa said. And my singing voice scares away asteroids. Speaking of voices, Vexel interjected. We should probably get the comm systems fully functional. Wouldn't hurt to shout our successes from the rooftops before someone else writes the history. And maybe fix that incessant buzzing, Tessa said, rolling her eyes. It's driving me crazy. That's just how the universe says good job, Vexel said. Like a cosmic pat on the back, only more annoying. Corvin joined them, looking slightly less harried but with the same no-nonsense expression. We're stable for now. If we can keep the artifact's output under control, we might just have a new lease on life here. New lease, same landlord, Vexel said. The universe. And it's still a terrible landlord, Tessa added. As they bantered, the weight of the past Iors began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. They'd bought themselves time, and for now, that was enough. Vexel knew better than to rest easy, but he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Okay, people, he said, taking charge once more. Let's not waste this victory. We've still got work to do. There were nods all around, the crew rallying to the call of duty, despite the exhaustion etched into every line of their faces. Bryn sighed dramatically. And here I thought we were done with the hard part. We're never done, Vexel said, but at least we've got a fighting chance. With that, they returned to their tasks, the rhythm of the colony shifting from desperate survival to cautious resilience. The artifact, still enigmatic, pulsed quietly at the heart of it all, a testament to the strange blend of chaos and hope that defined them. Vexel took one last look around, feeling a rare moment of peace amidst the wreckage. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and for now, that was enough. All right, you cosmic contraption, he murmured to the artifact, patting it gently. Let's see what other surprises you've got in store. As he walked away, he couldn't help but smile. There was still so much to do, so many challenges to face. But they would face them together, as they always did. And maybe, just maybe, they'd manage a few laughs along the way. After all, gallows humor was the best kind, especially when the gallows were in space. Vexel Tarrant stood at the edge of what had once been a very ambitious crater, now just another scene of organized chaos. The aftermath of their little cosmic skirmish resembled a poorly executed fireworks show, all burnt metal and smoking debris. Well, he muttered to no one in particular, at least it's not raining syndicate ships anymore. Tessa, ever the picture of unflappable sarcasm, sidled up beside him. I think we've set a new standard for near-death experiences, she said, squinting at the wreckage. Next time we should sell tickets. Tickets to what? A guided tour of our impending doom, Vexel replied, only half joking. Step right up, folks. See the amazing self-destructing colony, she smirked. Hey, it could be a hit. Limited time offer, you know, ends when we do. Bryn strolled over, looking far too pleased. I don't know about you two, but I call that a victory, Vexel snorted. Sure, if your idea of victory involves us being only half blown to bits. Optimism, Captain. You should try it sometime, Bryn said, clapping him on the back a little too hard, as if trying to jar some optimism loose. Look, I'm all for optimism, Vexel replied. But let's be real, we're one bad decision away from reenacting the Big Bang colonist-style. Doctor. Isra Corvin emerged from the rubble, clutching a data pad and wearing a look that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. The artifact's stable for now, she announced, though I wouldn't put money on it staying that way. Does anything around here stay stable? Vexel asked, gesturing broadly to the remnants of their latest escapade. Not our sanity, that's for sure, Tessa quipped. Corvin shut her data pad with a snap. We need to focus on integrating the artifact with the colonist systems before someone stupid decides to poke it with a stick. Or try to toast a sandwich with it, Bryn added, grinning. Is that a thing? Vexel wondered aloud. Using an ancient cosmic device to make lunch sound like a very us thing, actually. The governor's voice crackled over the colony's PA system, still sounding like he'd just survived a tornado and wasn't entirely sure if it was over. Attention all colony members. Please report any unusual activity to command immediately. Vexel sighed. Guess we should have mentioned the unusual activity part. Define unusual, Tessa said, because I think we're well past that point. Giant glowing artifact threatening to blow us sky-high counts, I'd say, Vexel replied. The backdrop of Selene 9 was one of frenetic hustle as the colony's inhabitants scurried about like overcaffeinated ants. People were trying to rebuild, to stitch together the torn tapestry that was their lives in a universe that seemed hell-bent on tearing it apart. So, Vexel turned to Corvin. What's the next step, besides not ending up like space confetti? Corvin pushed her glasses up her nose, a habitual gesture that somehow managed to convey both intelligence and exasperation. We secure the artifact. Integrate it with our defensive systems. It might just turn this place into something other than a prime target for every rogue fleet in the sector. Assuming it doesn't blow us up first, Tessa added helpfully. Right, assuming that, Corvin agreed with a roll of her eyes. Let's get moving then, Vexel said. We've got a lot of shouting to do and not much time to do it. As they moved towards what passed for a command center, Vexel couldn't shake the odd feeling of finality that clung to the air. It was as if the universe had given them a reprieve, and he couldn't help but wonder when it would come back to collect. The command center was less center and more grab bag of consoles and wires, but for the moment it was functional. Governor Klein was there, looking slightly less like a deer in headlights and more like a bureaucrat in mild distress. Captain Vexel, Klein greeted them, his voice doing its best imitation of authority. What's the status? Status is we're still here and not screaming, so that's a plus, Vexel replied. But we need to get everyone on the same page before this artifact decides to reenact a supernova, Klein nodded, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The miners are already voicing their concerns. They want assurances that their livelihoods won't be compromised. Tessa snorted. Livelihoods, huh? Pretty sure they'll be out of livelihoods if the colony becomes a crater. Vexel raised a hand. Let's not start a civil war, all right. We've got enough problems without infighting. Agreed, Klein said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. I'll speak to the mining guild leaders, but we need results, Captain. You'll get results, Corvin cut in. Assuming we don't all end up as stardust, that is. Vexel turned to his crew, a mix of weary but resilient faces meeting his gaze. All right, folks, let's get to work. We've got a save the colony type scenario here. No pressure. Just another day in paradise, Bryn quipped, cracking his knuckles. As they dispersed to their various stations, the reality of their situation settled over Vexel like an uncomfortable blanket. They had scraped through barely, and now it was time to see if they could make something more permanent out of it. Funny thing, optimism, he murmured, casting a glance at the artifact now securely housed within its containment field. It seemed to pulse with an idle curiosity, as if wondering just what these humans would do next. Tessa appeared at his side, arms crossed. Looking deep in thought, Captain. Dangerous. Just wondering what's next, Vexel admitted. Feels like the universe has us on some cosmic game show, and we're the contestants who didn't study, she added. Exactly, Vexel laughed, feeling the weight of her humor ease the tightness in his chest. But maybe this time we won't get voted off the planet. That's the spirit, Tessa said, giving him a light punch on the arm. Keep your chin up. We're still here, right? For now, Vexel agreed, casting one last look at the artifact. For now. The rebuilding process was less a graceful dance and more a chaotic scramble. A ballet of duct tape, makeshift repairs, and the occasional cursing fit when something inevitably went wrong. But amidst the chaos, there was an undeniable sense of resolve. A determination to forge ahead, to make Selene 9 more than just a footnote in the annals of space disasters. Funny thing about humans, Vexel said, watching as a group of miners hoisted a new beam into place. We tend to get up even after the universe knocks us flat. Bryn appeared, munching on what might have been food. Gluttons for punishment we are, or just too stubborn to know when to quit, Vexel replied. Same difference, Bryn said with a grin. Corvin joined them, looking as if she'd been through another battle of her own. The artifact is integrated, at least for now. Is that a good thing? Vexel asked, arching an eyebrow. Only if you like living, Corvin replied with an almost smile. We've expanded the defensive grid. Should buy us some time if anyone else comes knocking. knocking with a battering ram more like, Tessa quipped as she joined the group. Whatever works, Vexel said, as long as it keeps us breathing. Governor Klein appeared as if summoned by some cosmic irony. Captain, the miners have agreed to work with us on this. For now, anyway. Good, Vexel said. Let's keep it that way. We're stronger together and all that cliché nonsense. Survival of the smartest, Bryn said with a sharp grin, or the least dead. Vexel turned to his crew, a motley collection of the brave and the foolhardy. All right, team, let's make sure this place stays in one piece. We've got a colony to save and maybe, just maybe, a future to build. As they set about their tasks, Vexel felt a rare flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily crushed under the weight of reality, but it was there nonetheless. He looked up at the stars, the vast expanse of space stretching endlessly above, a reminder of how small they were and yet how tenacious. They had faced the void and lived to tell about it, and maybe, just maybe, they'd carve out a place in it yet. Here's to another day, he murmured, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. May it be less eventful than the last. And with that, he turned back to the task at hand, the future uncertain but undeniably theirs to shape.